So welcome everybody to Garfield Park Conservatory's second Wednesday lecture series. The series is once a month, so once a month you can join us. Our speakers, panelists cover a wide variety of topics. Today we have Toni Anderson, earth worker and community gem, one of my personal also inspirations. So we're really excited to have Toni here today. Toni will be talking about monarchs, migration and liberation throughout her presentation. Thank you all so much for being here. If you have questions for Toni throughout the lecture, you can type those in the chat section of Zoom. Toni may also have questions for us throughout the presentation, which we can also answer there, and we'll circle back to questions at the end of the presentation. So yeah, thank you, Toni, welcome. And I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and get your presentation started.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm so excited to be presenting to you all. Thank you so much, Sarah, and to the Garfield Park Conservatory for having me. Yeah, I am the founder and executive director of an organization called Sacred Keeper Sustainability Lab, located in Bronzeville on Chicago's south side. That's a very historic community. It's considered the Harlem of Chicago, a very historically African-American community, and I'm going to get way more into that on our presentation. I've been running this organization since 2012, founded in September of 2012. And I am going to get right into the presentation because I have a lot to cover. It's a lot to chew on, and I've got 7,000 slides to take you all through. So rather than looking here, I'm going to direct you and share my screen so that you all can see what I'm looking at. Right on. Right. Okay, so here we go. So again, my organization is Sacred Keepers Sustainability Lab. Our idea of how I founded this organization is really just thinking about the re-indigenizing our young people to live in a world that is vastly different than the world that I grew up in, and seeing that change over just the short few years of my daughter's young life, who's 20 now. But at the time that I was thinking about her world and what world she was going to grow up and be given, I was thinking about what are some sacred ways of being that we really, as a value system and as a collective culture, we've gotten away from. And how can I use frameworks of indigeneity, environmental justice, and stewardship, eco-spiritual stewardship, to create a program that was really had the ability to be very inclusive and holistic in how we looked at environment and space. And speaking of space, a lot of our conversation this evening, again, is going to be on our general idea of space equity and how we deal with that. I'm very sorry, you will hear my dogs losing their minds because my roommate is home, so I apologize for that in advance. It's just a song of dog. So, space equity. I hope that you all can hear me over the howling, or we could just wait a second for it to die down. Yeah. So space equity. If you notice the arrows are really symbolic, especially the arrows, the green and black arrows are symbolic of the ideas that we have in society around certain people, certain things belonging, and certain functions and spaces. And because we're really married to the idea that certain people and certain things belong in certain places, we inevitably have the conflict of space inequity. Something inevitably doesn't quite fit or belong, and or it's not harmonizing with the rest of the design. So a lot of the ways that we look at this work is through this lens of space equity. And I grew up in Chicago. I'm a South Side girl. And I spent a lot of my time on the southeast side of Chicago, recreating on our lakefront. My mom sent me to sleepaway camp every year. And what I noticed as I moved from the north side to the south side to urban to rural environments is that space was programmed very differently based on the function of the space and who's actually occupying the space. And a lot of times what happens is we have this idea that space is going to be is either race informed, social politically informed, it's economically informed, and a lot of times when those things kind of brush up against each other, it's hard to find a design that really harmonizes all of that, which is exactly what we need to do, particularly within urban communities. And I'm always thinking about what space is. So actually, before I go into that, I'd like for a few people to kind of maybe type into the chat the different things that you think space is for you, or the reasons that space functions for you the way it does. And I'd love to see a couple of those answers. If I can figure out how to move this mouse, I could probably see some responses. Respite, right on. I'm just going to put the chat right on the screen. Space tells me where my person ends and the world begins. Beautiful. Let's have more. A space to live and thrive. Celebration. Connection to nature and community. Community. Love it. Keep them coming. Space is infinite and therefore connected to lands, waters, ancestors, future. Yes. Boundaries. Space allows for walks and reflection. Makes me happy. Merza says, sense of belonging, it unifies us. Safety, accessibility, functionality. All of these things are the reason that we jam in space, right? I am gonna figure out a way to get this off my screen. I love the answers, keep them coming. I'm gonna continue to play. All right, yes, so space is all the stuff, right? Space is more than space. It's history, it's story, the stories of respite. It's our art, our culture, our economy, our employment, community education. It holds our youth and family and the natural design, our air, our water, our soil, our energy, all of it. And a lot of times we don't really think about how all these things need to be harmonized in space. But one of the things that we do in my organization is we focus a lot on how we might consider all the things playing out in space and how to create and design for that very thing. In the way that urban planners and different people just come in and script space, from building a school to building a bank, a business, to creating anything in community, we have these inherent conflicts, right? And it's often built in. It's often built in with the understanding that something will lose, something will fail here, and then in order for something else to progress or to thrive. And these are inherent conflicts that we have just as human beings, and the things that we've kind of learned to glom on to that stuff through experience and the politicizing of our lives. We have these different disruptions to how we harmonize with each other, ourselves, and the world around us. And a lot of times, these are like direct conflicts of something we're trying to solve, and we're creating another problem while we're trying to solve it. And this is like typical to everything that we see in our communities, from developed land use versus nature, you know. That's where all the public fights go on public land and public spaces. Somebody said in the chat that it was about respite. Well, if I'm in Jackson Park right now, and I love birding, and I love walking down Cornell Drive, I'm very concerned about my ability to continue being on my respite walk as the library comes closer to reality. We have people versus species. If I need this whole block for this shopping mall, but that means that a bunch of coyotes may not have their habitat. Oh, well, we got to make money. Economic growth versus serial displacement. Again, the library promises tons of jobs and an economic stimulation to that community. But the downside is that a bunch of people are probably going to get displaced because they're not going to be able to afford staying there very long. We have motorists versus cyclists. We have food urban aggers versus the pollinators instead of harmonizing us and getting us to grow together. We have private parks versus private development, public parks versus private development. And unfortunately, we have the age-old thing that we're experiencing right now, which is Black and brown people versus white people in space. A lot of the times that we're seeing these videos of people calling cops on Black men who are standing in public parks just doing their own thing is because we have a scripted idea that something belongs here and something doesn't. And this is the way we move through space all the time. I have another question. Why is it important to understand the biases that we kind of inherently have as we enter space? And anybody can type. Again, why is it important to understand our biases in space? Rather, they're biases about our economic belief systems, our value systems as they relate to race and class, and what we think about species and where they should be thriving. And should that butterfly be all the way across town, or can it be like right here on my shoulder? And so if a couple of people can type, that would be great. And I'm gonna try to figure out why my mouse does not like, okay, there we go. Our biases shape the way we move through space and have direct and indirect. It's going too fast, you guys are brilliant. So that we don't call it decolonize, so that we can decolonize. Excellent. To acknowledge and work towards overcoming, to understand what we're centering ourselves on. Someone else says, because sometimes what's destroyed or lost cannot be restored. Absolutely. Again and again, if we don't understand our biases, we can't understand other people's priorities when we discuss these conflicts. I love that. Chaos equals transformation. Absolutely. And Tish says our biases can block us from seeing and understanding the entire picture. Then we move forward, making decisions that end up benefiting some and not all. Absolutely. I'm going to come back out of this. And okay, yep. All right. So, right. We have to understand the things that we're kind of already programmed about before we can be about making decisions that consider all the things that we don't normally consider. So I love that, Tish. Absolutely. And because we know that it's more than land, it's more than space, what are the things that we do need to consider? This is real funky, so you're just gonna work with me on this one. Species, often this is the only thing that us environmental people are concerned about. What about those birds? What about those butterflies? What about those pollinators? And we're not really thinking about the people. And we actually sometimes think that people are kind of in the way of the things that we want to do, right? Or that we only need people to help us grow something and then people can just go away. That's a lot of the times what we're thinking when we have these big, huge participatory projects that require all these people to come out and do the job of building the space, but there's actually not a lot of thought about how these people will access the space, feel comfortable and welcomed in the spaces that they're creating. And when it comes to history and culture, what is being preserved, disrupted, or erased when we are creating these spaces? What are the opportunities and who benefits the most from them? And who's involved and how can we co-create instead of being in a hierarchical design, one that is inclusive and includes everybody's concern? Who thrives and who gets oppressed in the space? We really have to think about that when we are creating space as well. Is our approach a shared value? Are our projects and approaches considerate of the quality of the resources and the community's prioritization of these? Sometimes we feel that the community should be concerned about things that they just can't see. They just don't understand. And that might be true. We might be able to free up some availability to present something that they're normally not thinking about, but it cannot be at the expense of other things that are more priority for that community. And again, who thrives and who gets oppressed in this space? These are all the things that I think lead to space battles. And we are usually, we see these conflicts, and we have these beautiful emergent practices that are kind of coming out of some of the things that we've built here in Chicago, like the 606. You see this picture of the Obama Library plan at the top. And I'm not hating on the plan. I love the plan. I just think that the plan to build this library comes with some consequences that we have to be more radical and brave around solving. Otherwise, we're just kind of sugarcoating our ability to go and disrupt people's lives. The gentrification, you see the warrior Kim Wasserman down there holding it down in Little Village. You see the gentrification of Pilsen not being for sale, and the amazing Mama Johnson, who fought very, very hard, Hazel Johnson, in dedicating her life to making sure that the air in all Yale Gardens was breathable and livable, and that the lead was not in the soil. And oftentimes when you've got one person standing up for one thing, you've got somebody who thinks they're losing out in another space. You've got industry concerned about their economy. If we move this smokestack somewhere else, then we've got to think about all the things that we've got to think about it, and we're not really concerned about the things that you're concerned about. So classically, we create space battles when we don't plan for a future that has an inclusive design. And why do we choose the Monarch to talk about all of this? I love the monarch butterfly for its symbol for transformation and freedom. Originally, when I started working with the monarch butterfly, it was in the framework of personal transformation and the things that we need to do to be more conscious and alive inside of ourselves so that we can be radically transformed and willing to transform the things that we have to do in order to work well with one another in space. But I also love when I found out all of its symbology to the Latinx community. I was just amazed that I didn't know that it was considered a symbol for the community of Michoacan, Mexico, and how it relates to their celebrations of the Day of the Dead and the returning of, which is a celebration of the returning home of loved ones in the form of a butterfly. I'll just say that. And that the Michoacan is actually a community of overwintering. They're not just returning souls, but they're returning from the long migration to overwinter and to get ready for another cycle of generation. And so I love the symbology of that. And I also love the symbology as it relates to migration. And I'm going to get way more into that in a second. But the symbolism for its migration as it relates to African-American migration and Latinx migration was just a very powerful narrative for me. And one, how we can bring these two communities closer together in this shared idea, but also how we can kind of just see how nature and society often does marry each other. And I'll get more into that in a second as well. And also, for all the reasons that I love the butterfly, is it's a pollinator. And right now we need a lot of that on the planet. As some of you know, our pollinators are in trouble. The reason that pollinators are so important outside of being able to help us grow better food is that the health of the pollinators really are the indication for the health of the planet. When the pollinators are in trouble, it's an indication that something in the ecosystem is broken or breaking, and we need to fix it. So when the bees start disappearing, the birds stop migrating, when anything stops to flow in its usual pattern, something is wrong. So we need to really watch and monitor the pollinators, because the pollinators are giving us the information on what is going on in the total health of the planet. And they cover large, large areas of their migration, so they get a lot of pollinating done. And the most vital reason that we chose the monarch butterfly to frame this work is that we as Chicagoans are in the flyway of its migration pattern. And here's what the migration patterns look like. For our collective journey north, the migration patterns for the African American, the Latinx community, and the monarch are very similar, as you see on these maps. From 1916 to about 1970, tens of thousands of African Americans migrated here from the deep South to escape Jim Crow South and to have better opportunities in the North, jobs, better housing, better education for children, etc. And this took place in a concentrated way from 1916 to 1970. And why Bronzeville is so critical to this story in Chicago is because when they migrated here and got off of those trains at the lakefront, the Bronzeville community was the only community that they were allowed to live in. So that community became a historic kind of site on how Blacks from the South landed and made life here in Chicago. And if we look at the map on the right bottom, we're looking at migration patterns of the Latinx community out of Mexico and Puerto Rico as they move southwest and north. And again, in the middle, centered, is the monarch butterfly. And you will see that these migration patterns are pretty much the same. We take off from the south into the southwest and into Midwest and the north. And the migration patterns are the same, and not just the migration patterns are the same, but the reasons to migrate are the same. And that is survival of the species, period, and end of story. We can, jobs, da-da-da-da-da, but at the end of the day, this is about surviving the species and knowing that migration might be the only way to preserve ourselves. And so I'll look at this definition of migrate. To move from one country, place, or locality to another, thousands of workers migrate to this area in the summer, and to pass usually periodically from one region or climate to another for feeding or breeding. And these are the reasons that we move through space. It's just survival. And what happens when we are not allowed to move through space freely because there are imaginary boundaries, psychological boundaries, there are economic boundaries, there's political boundaries that classically create the space battles. And we're looking at a pretty big societal one, a couple of them right now. And how does the design of Chicago communities inform how we think about who and what belongs to space? And if anybody's willing to talk about that for just a second or to chime in on that, that would be great. And once again, I will figure out how to do this. Yep. Yes, climate change, of course, is a huge factor, and we're going to get into that as a reason in just a second, Tanya. Anybody else have any ideas on how the design of Chicago communities inform us on how we think about who and what belongs to space? The color of the key maps. Thank you. I will do that. I will get to that in just a second. Historical segregation, redlining impact. Yes, absolutely. I will explain the color in a second. Redlining and systemic oppressions, but also people like to pretend that Indigenous peoples aren't here as well. Absolutely, absolutely. Access to the lakefront informs us. Absolutely. A lot of what you're looking at on these maps have a lot to do with how we've organized access to downtown and the lakefront from planning. Defensible space, urban design, highway placement separates, absolutely. All of these things are informing, based on the segregation, we have made assumptions that various communities are more desirable and therefore superior, absolutely. I'm gonna come back out of that and we're gonna keep going. So yeah, a lot of stuff kind of informs how we move through space. The distribution of Chicago's African-American populations have changed little in 4 decades. And what you're looking at in the green areas are the African-American populations. That's what you're looking at. The green areas on the map identify African-American communities. The blue represents white communities, predominantly white or affluent communities, or communities that are not low to moderate income. And the other outlying areas, those yellow kind of areas, are areas where there's a large population of mixed race, mixed income, or kind of low to moderate income to middle class is these other areas. But the dominance for this particular map are helping you see how the green spaces over 4 decades have done little to change, even though African Americans came to Chicago in the early 1900s and settled here over the course of several years, segregation, integration, all that stuff. And 4 decades, 5 decades later, we're still living in the same sort of geography as when we first migrated here. And it makes me think of the question, what would become of the monarch if she couldn't migrate? If she couldn't move from Canada to Mexico, what would happen to her? Because the only reason she's doing that is to survive. So there you go. There's the answer. Let me get to the next one. So history repeats itself, right? A lot of you know of my work and that I do a lot of work at the lakefront at 31st Street Beach, which is now Margaret Burroughs Beach. And the work that I've done there and dedicated myself to that particular location is all about the story of Eugene Williams. And Eugene Williams was a young man who, there's a lot of stories, but the closest I've come to the truth of the story is that he was on a raft with a friend, and they were on the lakefront around 29th Street at a time that the beach was still very segregated. And his raft, he lost his ability to navigate the raft, and he drifted over into white-only space. And as a result, he was stoned. People threw rocks at him until he capsized, and then he lost his life, which kicked off the Red Summer of Chicago and the 1919 race riots, which kind of kicked off here, but also led to national unrest. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? Anybody heard this story before? Some black boy was somewhere doing something that he wasn't supposed to be doing, or in a space he wasn't supposed to be in, and he lost his life, and then space battle happens, and the city blows up. So this is an old story. It's been playing out over and over and over again. And we're not going to get rid of it until we figure out a way to plan more inclusively and design for an equitable space. So space inequity, space racism, climate change, and a pandemic all walk into a portal. And this is where we are right now in our society. We are looking at loss of habitat, redlining, gentrification, climate change, parasitic disease that happens to the butterfly and incidentally is happening to us as well. We have environmental toxins, space bias, policing, lack of resources, poor infrastructure, immigration issues. On and on and on. All of this to me represents that we've planned poorly for inclusive and equitable space. We're not thinking about all the things that have to be considered as we live and plan our lives and plan development. So how do I deliver all of this? I deliver this work and this content through my program called the Sky Council, which is short for the Sacred Keepers Youth Council. And our tagline for that program is Plant Freedom. We have a 10-month program that is about understanding the modules of sustainability and stewardship. We have another program called Where I Stand, which is intersectional practice on how different climate culture issues collide and how we really identify them and plan solution. And we have our summer Monarch Ecology internship, which is all of what we're going to talk about from here on out. So this is our tagline, Plant Freedom. And for the reasons, and you see my shirt, and they're available. So Plant Freedom is our tagline, and this is a trip. This is a picture from our trip to Kenya in 2016. The Summer Monarch Ecology internship runs for 7 weeks in the summer, and it's basically all of the things that we just talked about and monarch ecology and how we actually go out and create these spaces. We have a program called the Bronzeville Monarch Network Initiative, and this is our idea of building a cohesive outdoor community classroom where we have gardens all throughout the Bronzeville community and along the lakefront. We've partnered with organizations like the Nature Conservancy, the Chicago Park District, the Field Museum and their Roots and Routes Initiative. And basically the idea here is that we want to create a community of way stations. And way stations are a stopping point on a journey. And for butterflies, it's no different. They're looking for some specific things as we are looking for some specific things as respite and care on our migration journeys. And if you look at the bottom right corner, you'll see a butterfly flying desperately toward a plant, which is the host plant. Is the milkweed. For some of you all may already know this, but the milkweed is the host plant for the butterfly. This is in all of the plant kingdom, the milkweed is the only one that she will lay her eggs on. And this is particular pictures of the common milkweed, which is pretty common in Chicago. And this is the thing that we plant all over our habitats, all over Bronzeville and the lakefront. We're looking for safe passage. We're looking for ability to rest, to eat, to educate, to store up, to refuel, so that we can continue living the lives that we live. In the middle and the bottom, you'll see a picture of a little shanty. These were called, shacks and shanties were very well known to be peppered throughout the South, not just as living quarters for slaves and former slaves, but also as rest stops along the migration journey. You could stop at shanties and get rest and get food and water. And I know a lot of the train and the freight trains that move throughout the Southwest, for those who are migrating from Mexico, these are safe havens. These freight trains are often safe havens to get them not only out of the area, but to get them away from people and to get the same things that the shanty offered to the African American on their journey from the South. These are some of the things that we do in our program over the summer. We plant lots of different habitats. We have pollinator gardens all throughout the lakefront community through our partnership with the Roots and Routes Initiative, which is a field museum, and Chicago Park District Initiative to restore a lot of the lakefront natural area back into prairie space, which is what it was before we came and mowed it down for years. And this brilliant woman said, why are we mowing all of this when we could be restoring it to the prairie, which means all the things that depend on it and migrate to it would have way station. So that's what we've been doing on the lakefront and in our communities. This is the Burnham Wildlife Corridor, which is an area that runs pretty much from McCormick Place to 47th Street on meanders on the south and west sides of Lakeshore Drive. And we have planted a lot in partnership with some amazing organizations. We came out in one day and planted, I think the field says something like 22,000 trees we did that day. And my organization has also been planting butterfly habitats in partnership with some other communities along the way since. So these are just a couple of the things that we've done. And the reason that we also love this is because a lot of the things that we've been working on in Roots and Routes and the Burnham Corridor is to bring this harmony to the Latinx and African American community, because we both have this migratory story and we both are holding this butterfly in different ways. And if we're planting, how can we use that to have cultural reverence and healing with one another, and plant these beautiful habitats along the lakefront that hopefully our communities will continue to come to and heal, and know that our ability to be on the lakefront and take ownership and occupy that space is the right of our communities, whether we're sitting adjacent to the lakefront or not. This is our garden on the Sacred Keepers Youth Garden that's on 48th and King Drive. What you're seeing on the left is an early picture of the habitat. What you're seeing on the right is an overhead shot of the giant butterfly, which is often hard to see when you're just passing the garden. But the people across the building who live in the high rise, they look out their windows and they see this big, huge butterfly every day. And this is a full-on shot of the garden as you pass it on the bottom. So that is the garden, one of our butterfly habitats. That whole butterfly wing is nothing but a butterfly sanctuary for the monarch. And the perimeter sites, we have gotten support from the Audubon Society to build a bird sanctuary. So the garden is pretty big. It's a 3-lot garden. And that is where all of our classes and our recreational fun takes place. This beautiful site belongs to a group of people the 46th Street Block Club between King Drive and Vincennes, a beautiful woman, Carolyn Royster. She helps to organize this garden with some beautiful people on the block. These are some of young people from Green Corps that worked with her one summer to help install her butterfly habitat. And we've been supporting her throughout the years with various funding and support and stewardship support of that site. This is our Tale of Two Migration site located on 47th and King Drive. And some of you may have seen this. That's Alpha Bruton, amazing local artist in Bronzeville that kind of inspired a lot of the artwork that you're seeing and worked with our youth to get that done. Here's another shot of that. And these images represent on the totems, they represent the history, the African-American history, and the different artists and politicians and authors and beautiful, brilliant people that were fostered from this community, as well as the butterfly. So we challenge the youth to think about this intersectional tale of two migrations and represent that through this art and represent that through and the boxes themselves function as the monarch habitat. So that's that one. And again, why do we migrate? And the monarch is just doing what everyone is trying to do, and that is explore its birthright to survive. It's looking for food, shelter, and a safe place to progress, the future generations, and the right to just be. And I often wonder, if we were able to live from a lens that the monarch lives from, where the monarch is just freely in search of its birthright to survive and be. It is programmed with this migratory desire to move and to sense cold and to know it's time to go here and to sense warmth and know that it's time to return. And what if it were the case that every human being had the right to sense its need in the world and just go about finding that and going about sourcing that without some boundary coming in and saying that's not possible. We talk about in our program the life and journey of the monarch butterfly, the stages of the monarch butterfly, the 4 stages that it goes through from egg to adult, its lifespan, its ability to travel 50 to 100 miles a day, and its migration route and the times that the annual cycle of the migration itself. And I love this work because you can always frame it up in the baby monarch, so it's very translatable for our young ones as well. And all the young ones love the very hungry caterpillar story. And once you tell them what's all that about, they just light up at the idea that all these little eggs come out and they're crunching. So to not just see it in the animated version, but if you look at the top right corner, those are a bunch of very hungry caterpillars on a leaf. And all my little people really get a kick out of seeing real hungry caterpillars. We talk about their adult food and what they might need to survive once they come out of chrysalis. We know that all they need is a milkweed to lay that egg and to munch on that egg, to go through those caterpillar, those instar cycles. And then once they come out of chrysalis, what do they need? They need a lot of nectar. And so we go about the business of making sure that our youth understand the kind of stakeholding plants that the monarch is looking for. And those are throughout all of the habitats that we have installed throughout Bronzeville. And again, Mama Monarch is always in search of where she can put her eggs. There's a little movie here that you can go to, but I would say that if you want to see the full life cycle, that this little YouTube clip at the bottom is a really fun, like I think 1-minute video on seeing the entire life cycle. And these are the different types of butterfly, milkweed that you can plant: butterfly weed, swamp weed, tropical weed, not so much because we're not a tropic, and common milkweed, of course, is the king of the region, and a lot of butterfly weed. So if we could be about the business of making sure that this was everywhere, then the butterfly would have its shack, its shanty, its freight train. It would have what it needs to find respite and to continue its life. We did that. And the most important thing that we do once we do all of this is we actually activate the spaces. And the reason, again, that this is really important is because in a lot of times in our communities, it's thought of as abnormal for us to be together, gathering in public space by the many, celebrating. Well, COVID's changed all of that. But even before that, people who come into our communities who don't necessarily, who have a script that some things belong in other places, when they see us gathering this way, it's not normal. They all think that something's going down or something's going wrong, and we're just having a good old time. And if we can activate these spaces to draw community out, one, so that we can like sneak and talk about the butterfly while they're eating like peach cobbler and having fun and potato sack racing, great. But also we do it because why not? When you go to Wrigleyville on any Cubs night and you see the community alive and drinking and moving and hanging out and loitering, they are celebrating, and they have a right to do that. And when we do that same thing in our communities, it is often looked at as something wrong, that somebody's got to call somebody because those people over there barbecuing, that can't be normal, right? So again, space equity is going to continue to play throughout everything that we do. And the other thing that we do is we connect our youth in these spaces, and they do a series called the Conscious Kickbacks, and I miss them because it is COVID and we have not had one in a very long time. But this is their way of organizing their peers to come into these spaces so that the young people can occupy these spaces in ways that bring levity to our community stories and allow people to see how normal it is for us to be socializing and hanging out with one another. The role of citizen science in our urban stewardship is really important. We really spend most of our time in the summer monitoring. We do a lot of weeding and cultivation and planting, but then we have to go and look at what these sites are doing. Are they generating, is the milkweed healthy? Are the caterpillars healthy? Is the butterfly healthy? And we use these questions and our ability to really observe what goes on around us. It's not that they're just learning the skill of looking at something and taking notes about it and feeding it to a database, but they're also learning to be still in space and to observe what it is that is going on around them. Because if they can sit and watch a butterfly and determine its needs and determine what it might need from them in order to thrive, we might be people who can actually emerge into society and look around and start to observe who else is here, what's needed in order for that person to thrive. I'm thriving, but I'd like what's going on over there. So the butterfly, again, is just a metaphor for our ability to become good, compassionate observers of our spaces. And monitoring the milkweed, again, we do everything from monitoring the instars of the caterpillar itself, counting eggs, counting milkweed. And when you have a field of it, like we do at some of our lakefront spots, it's a lot of work to go out and count every milkweed and see how many eggs are on each leaf and how many caterpillars are coming out and how many chrysalis can we find. So it's grueling hot work in the summertime, and our kids, they nail it every single summer. This is what our Monarch monitoring data forms look like. I took a screenshot, so excuse that little blue box. These are the data sheets. As you can see, we take the stage of the egg or larvae, and we count as many. We look for disease. They learn about parasitic disease. They look at these plants and understand. We found a big disease last summer in one of our habitats, and it may be the case that we have to take all of that out to save the rest of the habitat. So these are the sorts of things. It's important to not just plant the sites, but to go and be good stewards of the sites from a monitoring perspective. And after we take all this data, we usually feed this data to the different organizations that are watching the health of the monarch butterfly, because again, these organizations know that these are not just, we're not just watching this data for the health of the monarch, but we're watching this data for the health of the planet. So it's very important that we give this work to people who are watching the big picture. And we also have other organizations that are watching World Health from other perspectives. And what would it be like if it was just as important to collect the data from the things that we do in stewardship, to collect the data and really move us to action on some of the other things that are going on in the world, like displacement through climate change, which is a huge issue right now across the planet. And even though we just did this big dance in COVID, and we're still dancing, and we're doing this big dance in racial unrest and racial justice, we are still in a big dance with climate change. And I feel that the next space inequity that we're all going to have to face is mass displacement through climate crises. We have a lot of places on the planet that are literally going underwater right now. And as those people move and become climate refugees, I hate that phrase, but just bear with me, as that becomes a reality for the planet. Just like I was in Atlanta when Hurricane Katrina hit, and we had tons and tons of people coming up from Louisiana, relocating to Atlanta. And it caused a lot of space battle. It caused a lot of stuff that we had to kind of consider and reshift and redesign for. And I believe that that is the next frontier of space equity, is us being able to accommodate people on the planet who are being displaced because of climate. And we know that it's coming. We know that it's not going anywhere. And so what are we doing as a community to prepare for the inevitability of this? And not just from a place of like some place over there, but when you have a community of people lose access to clean water, I would say a lot of those people decide to not live there anymore. And then where do they go? What can they afford to do? What are they being allowed to go and experience? So that is my talk. I got it done in less than 45 minutes. This is usually a 3-hour lecture. So I'm glad that we can get it down. And my question to you all before I pass things back to Sarah is to think about, I'd love to hear some answers on how you think this idea of space equity would inform how you see things this summer as you move through the community in these very public ways. You know, when it's COVID and it's dark and it's cold, it's okay to be outside. And then we start to move back around. Space is already being scripted very differently based on COVID and based on the Black Lives Matter movement. Space is already beginning to feel different. And I'm very curious as to how you all are thinking about space from a lens of harmony, social and natural harmony. And I'd love to hear a couple of answers from that. And then Sarah, you can take it back.
Good.
Let's see here. I feel like COVID people are spending much more time in their gardens. Yes, they are.
Mm-hmm.
Aw, thank you. Do you know you can find milkweed seed to plant our communities and yards? Yes, I got you on the milkweed. Yeah, take my information down. It's right here on the screen. This is my email address. These are all my sites and stuff. If you need milkweed or if you're curious about stuff, you need seeds, please get in contact with me. I'm always a big champion of making sure that we get as much milkweed into the soil as possible. And with that, thank you very much for bearing with me. And I will turn this back over to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Toni. I feel like you gave us a lot to think about. Some great concepts. I love the way you tie everything together. And you spoke a little bit about how nature kind of has the answers to all of our questions and issues. And I think that we see that more and more. It makes me think about the trees, right? And the issue with the emerald or the ash trees and the emerald ash borer, and how that really became an issue out of the lack of diversity in trees, right? And that's just, I think it's an amazing lesson for us, right? So Yeah, so yeah, I think it's definitely a wise thing to continue to look at nature for answers like that. I see it in the bees as well, with them starting to pick up disease that European honeybees have brought over. And where have we seen that before? Of course, during colonization, you know, in our indigenous communities. Um, so yeah, thank you for reminding us that we are a reflection of nature and we can learn a lot from each other. Um, Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you. Yeah, biodiversity matters in all things, right?
Yes. We've got a few minutes left. Did anybody have any questions for Toni that they want to put in the chat here? Toni, if there are any resources you'd like to share with people, I plan to
Oh my
send a follow-up email.
Yeah, I would just recommend that people go to Monarch Watch, Journey North, journeynorth.org, Monarch Watch. These are all organizations. The University of Minnesota is where I did my training with the U.S. Forest Service. Mike Rizzo, if you're listening and out there, I am the biggest worshiper of this man. Y'all understand, I love Mike Rizzo to pieces. He is amazing. If you know him, if you don't know him, get to him. He is the reason that Monarchs are alive and well in Chicago. He has single-handedly picked partners from across the city who are framing up Monarchs in all kinds of ways, and he just wants it in the ground and thriving. He is an amazing person. And so University of Minnesota's extension is where the U.S. Forest Service through Mike Rizzo has done a lot of its lean. They have an amazing training program, lots of resources. They actually have a store, an extension store that has a lot of Monarch curriculum, Monarch tools. If you're a teacher, an educator, and you want your kids in Monarchs this year, they're just a great resource for you. Of course, I'm a great resource for you as well. So feel free to get in contact with me. And I would love to help you figure out a way to keep Monarchs alive and well in Chicago.
Speaking of, I've got a question for you that you might be able to answer. Some time ago, I read an article about the monarch's preference and what milkweeds they prefer. I think I read that they prefer the common milkweed. Do you know that to be true at all?
Well, it also depends on what's available, because if nothing's available, they'll do what they have to do. But they do prefer the common milkweed. And one of the reasons for that is it has the biggest leaf span.
Okay.
And so it's very easy for them to tuck the egg underneath the leaf. It also has the highest amount of toxin. The milky, sticky substance inside of the milkweed is actually a toxin that once the caterpillar takes up that toxin, when it comes out and it's munching that leaf, it's eating all those toxins. That's actually what's changing the color. Those big green and black and white coloring on the caterpillar is it's sending a warning signal to predators: don't eat me, I don't taste good. And so that color, the bright color of the monarch and the bright color of the caterpillar itself, is really the reason that milkweed is preferred, is because it has a high amount of the toxin. And the name of the toxin is escaping my old brain, but yes, Sarah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yaritza has a question. They ask, what is the best way to promote space equity in public spaces? What steps should we take?
From a personal, internal place, see your biases. My kids have biases, and it's not just about people, it's about bugs. Like, I'm sitting here, so these ants all must die. And I don't think that ant should be here. So we all have these biases. You know, we flick things and shoo things away because I'm here and that shouldn't be. So I would think first, really look at your internal biases on what you think space is or isn't doing. The second thing I would do, if I were super radical, is I would disrupt space disruptors and check them. But also see what you can do to maybe lend what you feel is missing from space. You know, like if you see that something doesn't quite feel right for an older person? What can you do to shift that? If you're seeing accessibility issues for people who are physically challenged, what could you do? Like, just start to think about every single person and everything that has to move through that space and what might be needed in order for that to thrive. And then start to lend your curiosity and whatever capacities you have to shift that so that that space is more equitable.
Thank you. I think that really speaks to me personally too, with understanding that the journey to Black liberation and a more whole future really does begin with the self, right? So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate all of your comments. I'm seeing, is there a way to get the script of these questions and prompts? I don't know if there's a way to do that. Let me see. These are great. Yeah, I don't know how to do that, but yes, thank you all so much for indulging me and listening to my wonky approach to monarch ecology.
Thank you so much, Toni. I think that's all we have time for today, but we do plan to have this recording on our website and social media at a later time. If there are people who did miss it, I saw that there was a comment about that. And yeah, thank you again so much for all your wisdom and resources, and we'll be looking out for your projects.
Thank you so much. Come and visit me this summer. I would love for you all to see some of the sites that we work on, of course, with face masks on.
Yes. Stay safe, everybody.
All right. Be well, everybody. Take
Bye.
care.